Okay, hello and welcome to the webinar series of the Center for the Study of Conflict, Emotion and Social Justice. Today we are proud to host the roundtable Inclusive Media Practices, the TV Access Project. This initiative is an alliance of 10 of the UK's biggest broadcasters and streamers, namely BritBox, Channel 4, Disney, ITV, Amazon Prime, Paramount, Sky, STV, UK TV and the BBC. And they have pledged to work together to create a lasting and meaningful structural shift in the TV industry to ensure access for disabled talents. So our two guests today are Heloise Beaton, with project lead for the TV Access Project and disability consultant, and Johny Cassidy, who is the news workstream lead for the TV Access Project and co-chair of the BBC Ability Group. We'll first begin with an introduction to the project, followed by a roundtable discussion, and then we'll have a Q&A. So Heloise and Johny, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And lovely to see you all today. I will give a bit of an overview of TAP and how we formed, and then some of the key outputs. And then myself and Johny will talk about how we're exploring how we take all of the brilliant initiatives that have come out of the TV Access Project and how that might translate to news and what we're looking to explore from a news perspective. So bear with me, I'm just going to switch to screen share. So hopefully that has come up okay. Thumbs up. That worked. Amazing. So the TV Access Project was officially formed in 2022, and it came from two things really sparked it. The first one being a report called Everyone Forgot About the Toilets, which was produced by Underlying Health Conditions, which was a lot of first-hand lived experience of disabled people within the TV industry. And then Jack Thorne, the screenwriter, delivered the McTaggart Lecture at Edinburgh TV Festival in 2021. And he was involved in the making of that report. And it was a really scathing state of play about the TV industry, about the representation of disabled stories, who tells those stories, and how disabled people are involved in making them as well. And what that really did is it kind of sparked this conversation about what can we do to make the change required for full inclusion. And then what led from that was, and sorry, I've just realized I've got the wrong PowerPoint. I'm trying to look all professional here and I've got the wrong PowerPoint up. So bear with me 1 second. And what that did is it brought together the senior leaders from our 10 members to look at how they can work together, because we're very much a freelance industry. These problems exist across every single broadcaster and streamer. It's not exclusive in any way. So actually, how do we use our collective resources, our collective voices and power and influence and expertise to make important change? So here we are, full inclusion by 2030. So our 10 members, as Catalin said, are BBC, UK TV, Sky, Paramount, which very much encompasses Channel 5, BritBox, STV, ITV, Channel 4, Prime Video and Disney. And then there are also a couple of other layers to TAP membership. We also have our associate members, who are the smaller broadcasters like A&E Network, S4C, who perhaps aren't able to make the bigger, more financial commitments of our members, but they have pledged to adopt all of the underlying principles of the work that we're doing. And that also includes the major studios like ITV Studios, Sky Studios. And then we also have our partners, and our partners are a mix of disabled-led groups within the industry, like Deaf and Disabled People in TV, Triple C, who have been doing all of this amazing advocacy work for many, many years. And everything that we do at the TV Access Project is disabled-led. And we also have our partners who are the main industry bodies like PACT, Screen Skills, BAFTA and CDN. And they're really important partnerships to us because everything that we do, we are embedding back into existing frameworks within the TV industry. The TV Access Project, as I said at the beginning, our goal is full inclusion by 2030. So we've got a very specific goal. We've got a deadline. And once we finish that work, we need to make sure all of the resources and all of the commitments are still maintained. So that's why it's really important to have our partners. And as I break down some of the work, you'll see where that comes in. So that's our membership. And the way in which we function is our members, associate members and partners, as well as disabled freelancers within the industry with particular areas of expertise, all feed into 12 dedicated work streams. Each of these work streams meet for an hour every 6 weeks and are tasked with pushing through the work that comes out of the TV Access Project. And each of these work streams has a very specific remit to address a barrier that exists in the industry. And come up with solutions to remove that barrier. So it's very, very solution focused, the work that we do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some of the key outcomes that have come from our work stream so far. So the first one is industry standards. And this was really looking at how it's much more abstract, I guess, than the other barriers that exist, is that it's around attitudes and how we approach inclusion, and how can we come up with a framework for absolutely everyone within our industry to make sure that they're adopting inclusive practices into everything that we do, because it's not one person's job, it's something that everyone on a production should be thinking about. So that's where the 5 A's came from. So the 5 A's are: anticipate, we fully expect to work and continue to work with disabled people on a regular basis. Ask, we avoid assuming anything of anybody, so we have sensitive conversations about access as standard with everyone. I think this is a really important one for our industry. We are a freelance industry. Historically, there haven't been dedicated HR teams and HR departments, particularly if you're working for smaller independent production companies. So some of those formal hiring processes that would be typical in a larger organisation have unfortunately been missed. So that disclosure conversation hasn't been happening. So ask is a really important one to formalise that. Assess, we value self-reflection, so are clear and transparent about how accessible we are. So this is really about making sure that we're continuously checking in on how accessible we are and communicating that effectively to disabled talent who might be working with us. Adjust, we deliver what is needed consistently and ahead of time to ensure the full inclusion of disabled talent. So that's really about thinking about doing things differently. How can we change a schedule or change a location to make sure that all disabled talent are included in productions? And advocate, we set high standards for everyone, celebrating disabled talent and actively championing them. So as you can see from the 5 A's, they're really easy to remember. They are applicable to everyone, whether you are entry-level runner or you're a commissioner at one of the broadcasters. So everyone can adopt the 5 A's into their practices. So every single member, associate member and partner have adopted the 5 A's in their practice. So when a new programme is being commissioned, the 5 A's are referenced. It's always encouraged to then discuss that with your production teams. We've created some really brilliant animations that are available on the Screen Skills website. So they're a really great resource to point people to. They bring each of the 5 A's to life. And shortly we've commissioned some training again to be delivered via Screen Skills, which is job specific application of the 5 A's. So if someone's working in production management, it's how to apply the 5 A's to production management, or casting, how to apply the 5 A's to casting. So really supporting the whole industry to adopt these in their day-to-day practice. I'll just pause there and ask if anyone's got any questions at all about that area. Fab. Great, I'll move on to funding. So the barrier for funding, you know, it's not a unique industry in the sense that budgets have been getting tighter and having to be stretched further. So we were really looking at how we could ensure that adequate funding was available for talent on productions to put their adjustments in place. We were finding that producers were nervous about employing disabled people because they felt that they couldn't adequately put their access in place. So that's how the access funding request has been developed. And it's an agreement across all of TAP's 10 members to fund all necessary access costs on production not covered by Access to Work over and above the production budget. So it's a really exciting new funding method. It's importantly an uncapped, I shouldn't say unlimited, uncapped cost that can be submitted at any time during the production process. So we encourage a mandatory meaningful conversation at the beginning of production where, reflecting back on the 5 A's, you anticipate what access might be required on your show. But importantly, we know things change and we need to be adaptable. So if you get halfway through casting for Love Island and you have a new contributor who requires additional access to take part in the programme, you can then put in that access funding request, you know, right through to post-production. If you bring in an edit producer who has particular access requirements, you can then put in an access funding request. So it doesn't limit the editorial of the programme, and it also means that producers feel empowered to employ disabled people across their production, both on screen and off screen. It is available for both. And then the other area is around access to work. I received a message from a freelancer just the other week who has just heard back on her access to work claim a year after submitting it. And that's far too long for freelancers to be going without that really important resource to enable them to engage in the workplace. So we are just coming to the end of a pilot for productions to fast track access to work claims via a third-party organisation. We're hoping that the outcome of that pilot is a success, and we can look at how we might roll that out across the wider industry. We're also hoping to use the collective voice and power of TAP just to do a little bit more lobbying and campaigning in this area over the course of the next year or two. Does anyone have any questions around funding? Oh, I can see one in the chat. Mary said, who funds the Access Fund? So that comes from our individual members. So if you're creating a programme for the BBC, it would be via the BBC. If you were commissioned by ITV, it will be through them. So it's whoever's the commissioning body for that particular programme. And I think it's really important as well that all of our members are adopting this. So it doesn't matter who you're producing content for, you know across all of the 10 members that they will be covering access. So do the commissioning bodies have to find the funds? So those funds are from the broadcasters and streamers. So it's within their own internal departments that they're making that funding available. Cool. I'll move on to access roles. Really exciting role that has been rolled out across the TV industry is the access coordinator. If you're not familiar with an access coordinator, they are a dedicated role within a production who supports the facilitation of access requirements for all cast and crew. They will have received training to do so, really importantly. So they are across the legal requirements, and they are also, able to just make sure that they're problem solving across the production and making sure that access is always part of the conversation. I actually spotted one of our brilliant access coordinators, not our, she doesn't belong to us, had joined the call. I don't know if Beth is still there, if she's on the call, she might have disappeared. But yeah, we have got I think there's about 30 now. So access coordinators aren't necessarily engaged for the full production. They might be engaged for a couple of days in prep, a couple of days during production, and a couple of days in post-production. And it's really important that there's that key contact that crew and cast can go to if they have any access requirements. So that's also something that's funded via the access funding request. So again, we're not creating financial barriers for productions to engage an access coordinator. Some of our members already have guidelines in place. For example, if you're making a drama for UK TV or Sky, they always have an access coordinator in their original budget. But they're also available via an access funding request. So if you've started production, you've had your budget signed off, and you realise that an access coordinator would be appropriate for your production, then you can engage an access coordinator via that funding method. The next phase of work, we're looking at what other complementary roles would be required to support full inclusion. So we're starting to explore that of the access link, which is something that's been piloted by Channel 4 already to great success. And that's really, I've been comparing them to someone who's had first aid training, for example, in the sense that it's not a dedicated role like the access coordinator, who have a really important place, but it's about making sure that there's always someone on production available who has been trained and empowered to have those really, really important conversations around access, and know where to signpost people to as well. So we're currently exploring that and how that might be rolled out. And I think that would be particularly interesting for unscripted TV, where the budgets are much lower. So we've seen the adoption of access coordinators in high-end TV, and that's been brilliant because the teams naturally are much smaller in unscripted TV. And that's where I think an access link would be a really, really brilliant resource to have. And then, of course, looking forward to news, exploring how an access coordinator might be able to support a newsroom as well, and making sure that there's someone who can support in news. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box at the same time. Thanks for doing the 5As, Johnny. That's super helpful. Johnny's popped the link in the chat box for the animations if anyone wants to have a look at those. Janine has said, can you be an access coordinator if you are not DDN? So currently we're only training I say we, TAP isn't doing the training, it's via Screen Skills. There's also some agencies that are delivering training, and currently it is only deaf, disabled and neurodivergent talent that are training as access coordinators, because we feel that that lived experience is a really important aspect of the job role. And we're also then supporting the employment and growth of disabled creatives within our industry as well. Johny, perhaps should I throw to you at this point as well, just to kind of reflect on access coordinators and the potential in newsrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy to. So I'm Johny Cassidy, and as Ellie has said, I'm the Workstream lead for this new Workstream that has just recently been introduced. How can we utilize the learnings and that 5 A's framework into what we do in news? Now, there's obvious overlaps, but there's huge differences as well. But you know, it's all about flexibility, really. So it's about trying to take that framework and the different learnings to see how we can use it. And the access coordinators is potentially a really useful area. We think about, and we use as an example, really, I guess, for outside broadcasts, the bread and butter of a lot of what traditional broadcast journalism is. We think about that when we are deciding to do or choosing a location for an outside broadcast. What should we be thinking about? If we use that 5 A's framework, anticipate, right, okay, we should be anticipating that whatever it is, it should be accessible to anybody that needs to come along to that location. You let that be camera crew, let it be the journalists, producers, guests, potential guests that you want to rock up to be part of that outside broadcast. You know, if it's about diversity and representation on screen, you shouldn't be choosing locations that's not going to be wheelchair accessible, or whatever different examples we think about. So access coordinators potentially have a huge part to play. I would say it's not just going to be a lift and shift of the model that has been taken from the learning so far, but it's definitely something that we can adapt, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Johny. Does anyone have any questions around those access roles? So another key area that we've been working on is how can we ensure disabled people in the TV industry can access all the same spaces. So in phase 1, we really have been focusing on those fixed spaces. So studios, post-production facilities, and what came from that was a TAP self-audit. So based on building standards and regulations, but also best practice. So by including design for the mind, which isn't a legal obligation of building spaces, but it definitely contains best practice when it comes to ensuring spaces are suitable for neurodivergent individuals. We created this self-audit, and it's been designed in a way where any one of us can pick it up and walk around our building and complete it. So it's really, again, going back to that first day, anticipating that you're going to be working with disabled people by figuring out the accessibility of your space, and then assessing and adjusting and making those changes where required. One really exciting outcome that came from our work last year, we announced at Edinburgh TV Festival, is that all of TAP's 10 members have committed by the same time in 2025, so August 25, to only work with production spaces who have completed that self-audit. And that was really exciting because we saw the engagement from those fit spaces within our industry really, really rise. People have really embraced that commitment and have been completing their self-audit. We're shortly going to be launching that in partnership with one of our partners. More details to come about that in the next couple of months. So it'll be hosted online where people can submit their self-audit. They would receive a PDF which contained the details so that they could then put that on their website. So as a disabled creative, if I knew that I was going to go work in a particular studio, I could go on that studio's website and check that the accessibility was suitable for me. So really empowering disabled people, taking away the burden of having to go and find out that information for yourself. And then they would also receive a certificate to confirm that they've completed that audit as well. So that was a really exciting commitment from our members. We are now exploring more of that location spaces. So that includes things like high-end TV, to daytime programs, Escape to the Country, to news broadcasting and sports broadcasting. And as Johny mentioned before, those outside broadcasts and all of the challenges that they bring when it comes to accessibility, from the environment to the trucks. The amount of wheelchair accessible trucks available are absolutely shocking. Honey wagons and toilets that are wheelchair accessible. So really looking at what we can do as TAP to make some important changes there. Any questions about production spaces at all? Cool. Really importantly, looking at talent. So Mary just has popped in. Would be really interested to see audits for reality TV locations. So we have developed a checklist. So it's not an audit, but we have developed a checklist for productions who are doing location work. So that is available via TAP as well. I think if there's a way for me to share that amongst the group afterwards, then I definitely will do. So talent, the Creative Diversity Network collect data via Diamond, and that really monitors the overall input from all groups within the TV industry, both on screen and off screen. And we know from the data that we've seen a very gradual increment of disabled talent coming into the industry. But when it comes to those mid and senior roles, that has either been static, and it actually took quite a nosedive at one point as well. I think it was kind of sitting at 4.5, 4.7%, which is just shockingly low. So we know that there's a much lower glass ceiling, or there's talent, like myself, who have had a career as a TV producer, but found that it wasn't going to be a sustainable career choice for them. So we're really focusing on how we can ensure we're retaining and progressing talent in the TV industry. One of those areas is to be shortly launched, a hub on screen skills website for DDN talent. One barrier that we know exists not just in our industry but cross industry is when you leave education and go into employment, there's no handbook on how to be a disabled person. It's not, this is what you're legally allowed to ask for and these are your rights. It's something you have to figure out as you go. So we're creating this hub where people can go and look at the different stages of the employment process, from application right through to employment, what their rights are, what that looks like in the screen industries, as well as lots of other really gorgeous resources on how to get the most out of mentoring and networking. So that's going to be a really exciting resource. And as I said, we're now exploring whether there's some pan-industry intervention in this area to ensure we're supporting talent to stay in our industry and progress. any questions around talent at all? Cool. So the final one for me before we kind of hone in on news a little bit is really an important part of my job over the next year is making sure that all of these commitments that our members have made are filtering down onto productions, and that we're seeing that change happen. So last year we produced a producer's toolkit, which sits on PACT's website, free to access even if you're not a PACT member. And that really breaks down the different stages of production and how to embed accessibility and use all of these resources. We're also going to be doing a TAP Live tour of the UK over the next year, bringing all of these resources to the main production hubs across the UK. And as we said before, there's been some really brilliant outcomes. We're seeing the change happen, which is so exciting. Anecdotally, we're hearing about really brilliant experiences on production. So our latest work stream, which Johny is heading up, is around news, which is very similar to production, but just on steroids in terms of the speed that it happened. So looking at how we can apply all of these brilliant resources to broadcast news. And I'll just highlight before I hand over to you, Johny, that this is for broadcast news in particular. So if you are making current affairs content, for example, that's commissioned in the same way that other program making is. So if you're making a documentary, if you're making a panorama dispatches, that comes under the commissioning content, and everything I've just discussed already applies to that. Whereas broadcast news is ever so slightly different in the BBC, for example, like most of our other members, and then it actually sits quite separately, which is why we're then thinking about how this adapts. I'll just, a question in the chat. Would it be a good idea to have a head of production and line producers toolkit, since they are people who employ the crew? That toolkit's available for everyone on production, particularly for head of production and line producers to utilise. It's been designed for those who are employing and making those budgetary decisions. So yeah, that toolkit's available for them and anyone else to utilise as well. And I guess I'll hand over to you, Johny, at this stage to talk a little bit more specifically about next steps in terms of the news work stream.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ellie. That was a fantastic overview of what TAP has been doing for the past 2 years. And when you bring it all together like that, it's really good to see. So this work stream is TAP for News. It's all of those things, trying to figure out all of those different resources, all those different work streams, the different pieces of work that have been done since the inception of the TV Access project. How can we take those learnings for broadcast news? And it is important to point out that it's specifically for broadcast news, and not any of those other unscripted, like documentaries or long form audio, anything like that. It's really, it's about those traditional broadcast news, as we would see it, maybe the 6 and 10 for the BBC, or maybe some of Sky's content that they put out. So we've got the same sort of challenges, really, within news. If we just look at some of those work streams, we talk about talent. A lot of this work is about raising awareness and trying to challenge some of the unconscious and sometimes purely conscious biases that are out there. So if we're looking at talent, understand that deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people can and should be represented on screen as journalists and reporters. 24% of the population live with some sort of condition or impairment, so it's imperative, especially for news at this time of possibly post-truth, that we have authentic representation on air. But if we're going to do that, we have to think about all of the other things that come alongside it, and that is where some of the other work streams run in parallel and echo what we need to be thinking about in news. So production spaces, absolutely. Are they fit for purpose? I've heard of some new production spaces coming into some of big major newsrooms that have touch screens, for example. That if you want to bring up some fancy graphics, not accessible for blind correspondents, blind journalists. You have some spaces maybe that have steps up into it. That's maybe into a green screen or something like that, not accessible to wheelchair users. So again, this is all about anticipate. So it's really trying to think about all of the different aspects of different types of things that happen in news, in broadcast news, and how we can really push the industry forward. I think there's a willingness there for that change to happen. And obviously all of the partners have signed up within the major news broadcasters, BBC, Sky, Channel 4, ITN, what have you. They're all part of the TV Access project already. So it's just getting to the people that we need to get to think, right, okay, as partners, this is what we need to collectively be thinking about and trying to push and progress. We're at the very, very early stages of this work stream, and as any project like this is trying to untangle and try and figure out what are the areas that we need to put the most firepower and the most focus into straight away. And I think it's about being realistic as well with an industry like broadcast news, as you inferred, Ellie. It is production on steroids. The news cycle is immediate. It's super accelerated. It's lightning fast. But if we are going to be authentic about representing that 24% of the population, we really have to make a big concerted effort to make it accessible and inclusive for everybody. So I guess the next stages for us within this work stream really are to consider what we need to be focusing on, how we can work with the existing work streams, how we can equate some of the learnings that we're going to try and untangle and consider them with the different partners. And there are going to be differences, because I think somebody like the BBC, for example, a huge broadcast news operation, and a lot of different interconnected dependencies about how things happen, how things are procured. I think it's fascinating what you mentioned, Ellie, about the trucks, satellite trucks. That's an area, for example, where we could, as an industry, really come together and try and push manufacturers to adapt and produce trucks that are going to be accessible. We're not just talking about accessible for wheelchair users, but for all different types of accessibility considerations. And in exactly the same way as the TV Access project came together with that ethos of nothing about us without us, it's crucial, vital, that it's disabled people that are making these decisions are being brought in the decision-making conversations. So many times I've seen solutions being put forward that it's obvious that disabled people have in no way, shape, or form been consulted, because it's quite often a solution looking for a problem. But disabled people, as we know, are innovative, creative problem solvers, because it's the sort of thing that we'll have to do day in, day out. And I don't think broadcast news is anything different. If we are tasked with coming up with the solutions, we can identify the problems first of all, and once we've done that, we can come up with the solutions. So that is a sort of a brief overview of where we are with the work stream, what the ambition is. It's to really be trailblazers, I suppose, for broadcast news, to make it inclusive, because we do have a responsibility to everybody to allow equal access to the news. There you go. Any questions about that, about the work stream? That it's very early stages, as I keep saying. But I think there's a lot of learnings that we can take from what has already been done within TAB. Have any questions, please let me know.
Can I ask Ellie, do you want to go back to your presentation, or shall we start with the roundtable?
That was everything from me, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's have a very short roundtable discussion and then we can open it up to the audience. So I just wanted to kickstart it with one question. You work with a lot of partners, and part of my research was to look at the creative diversity policies of these partners, and they are sometimes very different. So are there any stark differences in how your partners operate within your collaboration, especially in terms of their creative diversity practices and guidelines? And do these differences represent for your project challenges or opportunities, or both?
Do you know what the really nice thing is, that this is such a non-competitive environment, that actually we all come to the table together, and one of our members will share something that they've done that's had massive impact. Another member might share a challenge that they've had to implement. And it's not about who's best, it's how collectively as an industry we can all do better together. So that's made it such a positive environment to work in. And also it's always led, as I said before, by disabled people. So they're looking back at us to go, what do we need to do? So actually we, in terms of, I think practically in terms of rolling things out, there's perhaps differences. We've got members who are like Disney from an international organization. We've got members like the BBC, which is obviously publicly funded. So in terms of like the practical application of things like the funding, internally they have different processes that they need to go to. But TAP is really looking at those big picture ethos sign-offs, and then I can hand back to them to go and figure out the the nuances and challenges within their own businesses.
Okay.
And I think you've hit it there, Elliot. As an industry coming together without that competitiveness, it was a light bulb moment after Jack Thorne's McTaggart lecture, really, when people thought, you know what? We can, if we come together as an industry, make a difference. Because as you said earlier, it's about freelancers, a lot of it, and people will be moving from different industry to, or different member to different member. But I think it's that power of the collective coming together. I think for the broadcast news workstream, I think identifying different technology, for example, that is used across a lot of newsrooms, maybe traditionally, historically, have been not the best in terms of accessibility. And it might be that a smaller partner member might be going to that manufacturer and said, look, can you make this more accessible? Well, not really. It's not something that's you need it across the industry. But if the industry are coming together as that one voice, then that heft, that buying power, it can really make an impact.
And it's amazing that everyone has this collective sense of sharing good practices rather than being too precious about these practices. So I think your projects are a really good interface between all these stakeholders and enabling this sharing culture. That's really great.
Yeah.
Okay, I think because of time, let's open it up to the audience. So we had a question earlier from Krista in the chat. Are screen skills referencing your toolkit on their EDI training courses?
I think Screen Skills as a partner embed all of TAP's principles. So the 5 A's are throughout all of their training courses. The toolkit, I'm not too sure. It depends if it's applicable, because it is for producers. So if, an EDI training course is designed for runners, for example, it might not be applicable to have the toolkit in there, but the 5 A's are threaded throughout all of screen skills training, and yeah, the toolkit is flagged where relevant.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Judith. Where's her hand up?
Hello.
Oh,
Yeah, I had a question about people with learning disabilities, and particularly I was thinking of that in relation to your talk about the news and making the news more accessible. And one of the issues we've come across in our research with people with learning disabilities and their inclusion in everyday environments is that quite often they can't follow, or they don't understand the news. But I think this is not just a question about news. I think this is a question for all of the areas of TAP that we've been hearing about, which are absolutely great. But I think a lot of the examples used was like wheelchairs or sensory issues. I was just thinking about those more cognitive impairments, if you like, or intellectual disabilities.
Well, I can take that, Judith, for news, and it's a great question, and it's something that I've been thinking and considering a lot. A colleague of mine at the BBC did a piece about a TV station in Finland. I think it was Finland. It was one of the Scandi countries, and they have got an evening news show produced for people with learning disabilities by people with learning disabilities. They take on they make the editorial decisions. It's run, you buy them. It's got somebody with a learning disability who's the presenter or producer. And that's doing great stuff in Finland, but it could be considered niche. But if we are talking about deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people, I think people with learning disabilities are certainly part of that. So you're absolutely right. We should, if we're considering audiences, and this is all about the audience, isn't it, really?
But also employees, I think, in
it is, yeah.
in the industry as well.
Yeah, totally. We should have people within. If it's nothing about us without us, we should have people within the news industry, within journalism, that are coming from all types of different lived experience and backgrounds, and learning disabilities is absolutely part of that. But at the BBC, I know that we, across our organisation, over 22,000 people working at the BBC, less than 10 have got a learning disability.
Mm-hmm.
And that's shocking. That's a shocking indictment.
Yeah,
it is.
It is.
So I agree with you 100%.
And in terms of TAP's work, absolutely. When we say all deaf, disabled, neurodivergent talent, we include all. So, we are exploring templates of easy read documents. We're partners with BBC Studios, who've launched a complete suite of easy read post-production paperwork and call sheets for talent. And we work with organisations like Access All Areas. They're another one of our partners who specialise in that area in particular, and support on and off screen. And there's some access coordinators that are also moving into what we've been calling creative facilitator roles. So that's for on-screen talent. So if you think of programmes like Ralph and Katie on BBC, there are creative facilitators involved in that. So yeah, absolutely, that's we are considering all DDN talent, and also making sure that all intersectionalities of underrepresentation are considered as well.
great.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Krista.
Yes. Oh God, I think I'm on. Yeah. I want to take you back to the access to work problem. Because that's a nightmare, isn't it? So you talked about companies covering stuff that Access to Work doesn't. What about the issue of covering things that Access to Work in theory does until they get their act together? Is that something that you're also looking at, or that they're also willing to do?
We're just waiting to find out what the results of the pilot are. So hopefully that pilot will become a solution to fast track those Access to Work claims.
So is that fast tracking as in Access to Work actually going to move it along as fast as necessary for television gigs? Yeah. I mean, knowing how quickly some things crew up, it sounds like a big ask of a government department. Can you hear me? No?
Sorry, was it the question?
Sorry, well, I was saying it sounds like a big ask of a government department to move things as very fast as some shows crew up. And I'm just thinking, is there a way of bridging the gap, basically?
I mean, that pilot should hopefully be that solution. So as soon as we have the details of the pilot and how that's been rolled out, then we will publicise that.
You'll know. Okay, thanks.
I think it's a very important point, but about the shortcomings of Access to Work in general. It's there possibly as something that it's not able to fit the template of what freelance work is. We know that there's an issue around that. If you don't know from maybe 1 month to the next what it is that you're going to do, and you have to keep doing different applications. So yeah, that's a problem with Access to Work. It's possibly a one-size-fits-all model when people are working in lots and lots of different industries.
Yeah.
We also have a few questions in the chat. From your experience and methods in promoting inclusive media practices, what success have you seen, and also what challenges still persist? That's by Utko.
I mean, I think it will be, before we kind of get like hard data, seeing the Diamond Report over the next couple of years, I think it's not the easiest thing to necessarily monitor the outcomes, but what we're hearing anecdotally is just incredible. The amount of people that are going, I've been asked and I've had my access put into place for the very first time, or I've never felt comfortable sharing my disability status until my production engaged an access coordinator. And it's hearing those stories that is just absolutely incredible. In terms of challenges, I think, Access to Work, of course, is one of the big ones. And the other area we're looking at, what was the other one that we're focusing on this year? Really, that talent development, because again, these aren't quick fixes. We can't go, right, here's money, that'll fix that. I think there's some lead up and there's a lot of groundwork to do in the meantime. So I think that's going to be perhaps one of the difficult ones on the road to full inclusion by 2030, is that we can't necessarily see that change happen overnight. But hopefully we see the culmination of all of these changes making an impact.
One of the examples that I think is fantastic, and if I'm talking about stuff like this or anybody asks me about it, and I think it probably was, Ellie, a direct result of TV Access Project, but there's an episode of Silent Witness. And if anybody watches Silent Witness, there's a deaf character who is the daughter of Jack, who works in the forensic laboratory. And she had a BSL sign language interpreter with her. And somebody had said, just in passing, oh, who's that? Says, oh, that's my BSL sign language interpreter. And somebody went, are we paying for that? No. And it said something about, no, that it comes from Access to Work. And I think it's the first time ever in any sort of drama or anything like that I've ever heard Access to Work mentioned. And I think that's purely about awareness. That actually even sneaked into the script. I thought it was brilliant.
We also have a very interesting question here by Susan. Are you noticing any regional disparities in terms of take-up of these initiatives?
No, no. I think there's a benefit having the project lead myself, being based in Glasgow and having worked in production in Glasgow for well over a decade. I think it's no disparity across regions. I think one of the challenges that we've noticed is making sure that there's enough access coordinators getting trained across the regions. I don't think there's been any trained in Northern Ireland so far. We have seen the Scottish cohort grow quite a bit over the past year. I think there's possibly only 1 or 2 in Wales. So I think that's going to take some time to get to where it needs to be. But otherwise, the application, and again, it's all about being collaborative, and all of the screen bodies, so Screen Scotland, Screen Alliance North, Screen Northern Ireland, Screen Wales, they're all part of TAP as well. So they're making sure that no one wants to get left behind. So they're making sure that they're filtering it out amongst their suppliers as well.
Great, thank you. I'm aware that Karen is back. She had network issues. Karen, do you have any questions?
I'm so sorry, I've had a massive network outage issue. I'm going to listen back to the recording, but lovely.
Okay.
Oh no.
Oh dear.
Yes, unfortunately. Then I'm going to get off my bike.
Oh no. Anyway, yeah, she's off again, unfortunately. Sorry, Krista, is this a legacy hand or do you have another question? Krista?
I'm trying. It's a legacy hand. Sorry.
Okay. No worries, no worries. Okay, I have one last question if no one else has. Let me just check the chat. No. So one question which we discussed actually before is that this project puts a lot of emphasis on inclusion off-screen and access. Does it also consider the link between off-screen and on-screen? So for example, how the diversification of the workforce, especially with disabled talents or professionals, media professionals off-screen, can inform on-screen representations and lead to more stories and perspectives from the disability community in media content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of going back to Jack Thorne on that, he was the only writer writing disabled stories because, he'd almost proved himself to be a brilliant writer in non-disability topics. And then people trusted him to tell these absolutely gorgeous stories about disability. And actually, he said not long ago, I need to stop doing this because I don't want to be the only person telling these stories. We need more people telling these stories. So yeah, more voices. We're seeing more writers being brought in. We're seeing a lot more lived experience being brought on to projects, particularly if they are specific. So if it is around ITV have got a drama coming up called Code of Silence, which is very much about the deaf community. So, the deaf community were consulted on projects like that. So, yeah, that's absolutely considered. One thing that I think we should also be mindful of as well is that disabled people don't necessarily want to only make disabled narratives and disabled stories as well, and that we should not only be focusing on elevating them in those roles, that they should be, and we should be able to produce any kind of content.
Absolutely. I think this, when we talk about coincidental representation, that's progress. Within news, we have got at the BBC something called the 50/50 project. You all might be aware of it, and it's a database really that for experts that producers can draw upon. So if you have got a story that you're doing about immigration, you'll have somebody who's a wheelchair user who is also a lawyer, an expert in migration law, or somebody who is maybe neurodivergent, who is an expert in climate change, have them on. So it's that incidental and coincidental representation that really drives, people's understanding about disability forward. But I think, go back to what you were saying, Catalin, it's about pushing people up through the industry so people are aware of, and within news, I'm talking about within journalism, my discipline. There might be a story, maybe about the LA fires, where there is an angle there about disability, but nobody is going to really think about that unless you've got an editor or a reporter or correspondent or camera crew or whatever, who understands that, who's from that background, has that lived experience, and has been able to push that it's not just about what might be considered that traditional narrative of news. There's lots and lots and lots of different angles to explore, and we've got a responsibility to all of the audience to be doing that, which is why we do need to have that representation across all newsrooms.
Yes, and I think this diversity of voices is very important because the disability community is not homogeneous, it's very diverse, and this needs to come across. And also, like you perfectly said, there may be a lot of disabled media professionals who don't want to be spokespeople for a community. They want to tell their stories regardless from their own subjective perspective. And yeah, that's a really good point.
I think sometimes there's a challenge as well, and I've certainly had it. A long time ago, I did a big series at the BBC, and it was about the positive. My background is as a business journalist, and it was about the positives that disabled people, deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people bring to the UK and global economies. And it was about people who were entrepreneurs, who perhaps the 9-to-5 didn't work. So again, with that creative, innovative problem solving, they started their own business, which matched the hours that they needed to be able to work, and all of those different problem solving techniques that they come up with. So they were entrepreneurs, they were starting their own businesses, they were looking at niches in the market. And when I went to editors, I said, yeah, this is really, really good, but can we please show the jeopardy? Can we show the pain? Can we show why they did? No. And it's really hard to push back on what those really deep-rooted systemic stereotype tropes around disability are. I say, look, that's not the reality for a lot of people living day to day. When the barriers are taken away, disabled people, are very, very creative and innovative. So it's trying to challenge those narratives, and you need an editor who understands lived experience and say, yep, go fill your boots.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm aware of time. Sorry for going over time, and we could continue this conversation much further, but unfortunately we have to finish here. So Heloise and Johny, thank you so much for your time and for answering the questions and sharing with us this really, really important project. And just to flag up, our next CSJ seminar is on Wednesday, the 19th of February from 4 to 5 p.m. And it's called Beyond Exceptionalism and Area Studies, Transnational Feminist Perspectives on Anti-Gender and Feminist Discourses and Politics by Professor Najee Al-Ali from Brown University. So thank you all very much and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.